Hi, I'm Maris. I came home from the hospital holding my newborn grandson, still wrapped in the blanket his mother picked out before she died. I knocked on my own son's door, and he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "That's not my problem." But that was only the beginning. They erased me, on paper, in whispers, in court. They sold my home, claimed I was unstable, said I had no right to raise the only piece of Vera left in this world. But what if I told you? They didn't expect me to fight back. Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have done what I did and drawn your own line? The cab slowed to a stop in front of the house I once called home. The early spring air in Plano was sharp, crisp, still clinging to the last remnants of winter. I stepped out, balancing Elior against my shoulder, his tiny body tucked into a soft blanket Vera had picked out before the delivery. My arms ached, not from the weight, but from the quiet grief that had settled into every joint. The neighborhood looked unchanged, lawns neatly trimmed, shutters closed, and driveways empty. Sunday morning, quiet. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk, watching the door. Trent's door. My son. I prayed this would be the moment he'd step up, not for me, but for the child his wife had died bringing into this world. I walked up, each step more uncertain than the last, and knocked gently. A pause. Then the door opened just a crack. Trent appeared, pressed shirt, perfect haircut, eyes tired but alert. His gaze dropped to Elior, then rose to meet mine. "That's not my problem," he said flatly. The door clicked shut before I could get a single word out. I stood there on the porch, stunned, holding his child in my arms. No wind, no sound. Just me and the sting of something deeper than rejection. Erasure. I looked at the door, hoping maybe he'd open it again, realize the cruelty in his words. But nothing. Not even footsteps behind the door. Just silence. I walked slowly to the bench by the curb and sat down. Elior stirred, his lips parting in a soft yawn. I pressed my cheek to his head, blinking back tears I refused to let fall in front of him. It wasn't the cold that made my hands shake. Images flooded in. Trent at 5, gripping my hand so tightly his knuckles turned white as I walked him into kindergarten. His first fever, when he begged me not to leave his bedside. The night he crashed my car and cried in my lap, fearing he'd disappointed me. And now, he couldn't even open his door. "You're not a problem," I whispered into Elior's soft hair. "You're everything." I stayed there until the baby began to fuss. Then I stood up, checked my phone, and called Claire, a longtime friend from church. She lived across town and answered on the second ring. "I'm on my way," she said, no questions asked. That night, Elior and I stayed in Claire's guest room. The sheets were crisp, the lighting dim, and the room smelled faintly of cinnamon potpourri. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching him sleep in the bassinet Claire had dug out from her attic. He looked peaceful, untouched by the coldness of the world. Out of habit, or maybe need, I opened my phone and scrolled through social media. I hadn't seen Trent's profile in weeks, but tonight, curiosity won. The first post on his page stopped me cold. A photo of him at a birthday dinner, balloons, cake, neatly wrapped presents. Callista, his new girlfriend, leaned close with a hand on his chest. The caption read, "Family means choosing who matters most." There were dozens of comments. "So happy for you. You deserve the best." Not a mention of Elior. Not a mention of Vera. Not a word about me. I stared at the screen, the glowing light casting my reflection faintly over the image. Me, superimposed over the family I was no longer part of. I set the phone down beside Elior and looked at him. His chest rose and fell, his mouth forming small, unconscious pouts. "If I don't matter," I whispered, "then I'll show you who does." The next morning, I wrapped Elior in a fresh blanket, packed a few bottles and a new container of formula, and walked the short distance back to Trent's house. Claire offered to drive me, but I needed the walk, needed to feel the ground under my feet, the air on my skin, anything to keep my hands from trembling with the weight of what I was about to do. I wasn't coming to beg. I was coming with peace, offering diapers and formula, hoping maybe a practical gesture would mean more than words. The front door opened before I could knock. Callista stood there, makeup perfect, her coffee in one hand like she had all the time in the world. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," she said, glancing at the baby. "Still trying?" I kept my voice even. "I'm here to bring some things for Elior. Is Trent available?" She took a long sip before answering. "He's not interested in revisiting old dynamics. We're building something clean, fresh, you understand." My jaw tightened. I handed her the bag. "Tell him I came in peace." She shrugged and closed the door before I could say another word. That afternoon, I made my way to a small law office near downtown. The man behind the desk, Leonard Blake, had worked with my husband before his passing. He stood when I entered. "Maris, I heard about Vera. I'm so sorry." I thanked him, sat down, and placed a folder on his desk. "I need legal clarity. I don't want custody. I just want to know where I stand." He opened his drawer, pulled a thin file, and handed it to me. "You're not going to like this." Inside was a copy of a guardianship transfer, filed by Trent with the state. Effective immediately. My signature was there, buried on a form I'd been handed at the hospital, told it was about Elior's discharge paperwork. My heart sank. I stared at the ink. How can a pen erase 35 years of motherhood? Leonard leaned forward. "It's unethical, but legal. He used your trust. You thought you were signing medical documents. This gave him full control." Later, I visited the daycare Trent had registered Elior at. I brought the bag of extra formula and a new pacifier. The young woman at the front desk looked nervous when she saw me. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. We have strict pickup and drop-off protocols. You're not listed on his file." I smiled politely. "I'm not here to pick him up, just leaving a few things." She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll make sure it's passed on." I placed the bag gently on the counter and turned to leave. No argument, no accusations, just a fire, slow and steady, growing behind my ribs. Back at Claire's, I opened the box Vera had left behind. A small cedar chest filled with baby items. Onesies, socks, even a soft cap with little bear ears. Her stitching was delicate, initials sewn carefully into the fabric. VA. I held up one tiny white onesie, the thread glinting gold in the light. She had made this with love. She had expected him to wear it. The next morning, I folded that onesie neatly, placed it in a clear plastic envelope, and walked again to Trent's porch. The sun hadn't yet reached the street, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. No one watched. No one needed to. This wasn't for them. I set the envelope down gently, centered it on the welcome mat. No note, no explanation, just truth, left quietly at their feet. As I walked away, I didn't look back. The sidewalk stretched ahead of me, endless and still. I whispered to myself, "You may have struck me out on paper, but Vera's hands are stitched into that boy's soul, and I will not vanish." I was in the middle of folding Elior's laundry when the call came. The ring was sharp, almost bitter. I answered with a quiet hello, already recognizing the voice. Leonard Blake, the attorney who had worked with my husband for years. There was hesitation in his tone. "Maris, I didn't want to do this over the phone, but you need to know, the house, it's been sold." My grip on the phone loosened. "What are you talking about?" He explained gently, like one would to someone waking from a dream. The title had transferred weeks ago. Documents signed, finalized. "Your name was on the release forms, Maris. It was presented as part of your insurance update." I couldn't breathe for a moment. I had signed that paper myself, trusting Trent. He'd handed it to me with a pen already clicked. Just something for Mom's coverage. Quick signature. You know how red tape is. I remember nodding, not even reading it. Because it was him. My son. After the call ended, I stood in the middle of the small guest bedroom, surrounded by toys and baby wipes and bottles, and I felt like a stranger in my own life. The house I'd worked 3 decades to keep. Gone. On paper. Just like that. My mind drifted back to that day. Trent had shown up with a folder, said it was urgent. Vera had just been put on bed rest, and my focus was everywhere but on fine print. He smiled like he always did when he wanted something fast. "You trust me, right?" he said. I signed it without a second thought. And now? I was packing cardboard boxes. Vera's photographs came off the walls first. Then the memory books, Trent's drawings from 2nd grade, a cracked ornament he'd made in Sunday school. I wrapped them in newspaper and stacked them neatly, like they were evidence in a case only I cared to remember. I didn't cry. There was no energy left for that. Just a dull, pressing ache behind my eyes. I packed slowly, deliberately. Every drawer, every closet, like I was peeling away layers of a life I'd already lost. I came across a box of baby hats Vera had knitted before she went into labor. Some still carried her perfume. I didn't know if Elior would ever get to wear them. By the time the moving truck pulled away, it was dusk. I followed in Claire's car, holding Elior in the back seat while he slept. We stopped at a small storage unit facility on the outskirts of town. The air was dry, the concrete cold. I loaded the last box inside myself. No one helped. No one offered. Inside that unit, I laid down a blanket, fed Elior from a bottle, and whispered into the quiet. This wasn't just a home. It was where I remembered who I used to be. The unit door slid closed with a metallic snap. The echo lingered, like a final note in a forgotten song. That night, back at Claire's, I sat on her porch with a glass of water and my phone in hand. A message popped up from Callista. I hesitated before opening it. "Make sure you don't trespass. We've updated the security system." I stared at the screen. No fury, just fatigue. I deleted it without typing a word. There would be no reply. But a vow took root in that silence. One I wouldn't break. One they'd never see coming. Elior's breaths were soft, steady beside me, a rhythm I clung to in that room of bare walls and buzzing fluorescent light. The cot creaked when I shifted my weight, careful not to wake him. There was no clock in this temporary space, just time marked by the baby's needs and the ache behind my ribs. The shelter wasn't much, but it was warm, and the social worker had smiled without pity when she handed me the keys. Everything here was temporary: the bed, the kitchenette, the chipped tile underfoot. But Elior? He was constant. I turned my head toward the duffel bag by the wall, the one I'd packed with shaking hands 2 nights earlier. Somewhere near the bottom, beneath formula canisters and hand-me-down onesies, was something I hadn't touched yet. I pulled it out gently, a small velvet-covered box. On the lid, in faint cursive, it read, "For Mom, if," Vera's handwriting. I traced the letters with my fingertip before opening it. Inside was a folded letter and a small flash drive. My throat tightened before I even unfolded the paper. I sat down again, the cot groaning beneath me, and held the letter in both hands. "Mom," it began. Just that word, and already I felt undone. I don't know what's going to happen, and I hate that I even feel the need to write this. But if something goes wrong, if I'm not there, please don't let Trent decide alone. He's not the man he used to be, and I don't trust what he'll become if left unchecked. I paused, pressing the paper to my chest. The ink had smudged in one corner, like she'd cried while writing. I wasn't the only one who'd seen it coming then. That coldness, the control, the silence that replaced affection. "You always saw me when I felt invisible," she wrote. "Please don't let him grow up that way. Let him feel loved, really loved, the way you loved me." The tears came, not for her death, which I'd grieved silently and painfully, but for her trust in me, for the quiet dignity of a woman who knew her worth and passed it on in a whisper. The next morning, after feeding Elior and changing him into a sweater too big for his arms, I made my way to the library 2 blocks over. a volunteer helped me log into an old computer near the window. I plugged in the flash drive and clicked the file marked Elior. There she was. Vera. Her hair pulled back, eyes tired but clear, sitting in a hospital gown. She looked directly into the camera. "If you're seeing this, I guess things didn't go as planned." She smiled softly, then sighed. "I love my son. And I married Trent because I thought he'd be a good father. But lately, it's like I live with a stranger who only speaks in schedules and expectations." I leaned in, barely breathing. "Callista," Vera said with a dry laugh. "She's a storm dressed like spring, charming in public, cold in private. I know Trent listens to her more than me now." Then her voice softened. "But you never treated me like an obligation. You made me feel like a mother even when I doubted myself. You made room for me without ever saying you had to." My hand hovered over the pause button. I let it play. "Please protect Elior. Not just his body, his soul. Let him laugh at silly things. Let him eat dessert before dinner sometimes. Tell him about me when he's ready." The screen dimmed as the video ended. I sat back in the chair, pressing both hands to my face. My cheeks were wet. I slipped the flash drive into my coat pocket, then stood up and gathered my things. As I reached down to adjust the stroller, Elior stirred, his hand brushing against mine. "You're not just my grandson," I whispered. "You're her last word. And now, I speak next." The letter came on a Wednesday, folded clean, sealed in an envelope with the state seal embossed in the top corner. No warning, no call. I sat on the edge of the shelter bed, with Elior nestled in a soft fleece blanket beside me, unopened formula still warming in a cup. My fingers tore the paper carefully, as if a gentler touch might change the content inside. The words hit hard, blunt as a fist. Motion to evaluate legal capacity for guardianship, claiming emotional instability and cognitive decline. Trent's name was stamped clearly at the bottom. I read it again. Aloud, this time. Slowly. Each syllable rolled like stones in my mouth. I didn't cry. Not even when I reached the line that read, "Subject exhibits patterns of irrational behavior and compromised judgment." I just sat there, one hand on the edge of the crib, the other gripping the paper like it might bite back. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse with a calm I didn't know I had. The clerk's desk was manned by a girl no older than 22, hair pulled back tight, lips painted a little too red for mourning. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I slid the notice across the counter. "I need the full petition, and I'd like to add my own statement to the file." She blinked, took the paper, and typed, "We can print that for you. Do you have a case number?" I did. Memorized it. When she handed over the documents, she gave me a look I wasn't expecting. Something like surprise, maybe even respect. "You don't sound unstable to me, ma'am." I gave her a small smile. "Neither does Vera. But we know how that ended." That evening, I found myself outside Trent's house again. The lights were on. Through the curtains, I could see silhouettes moving, his and Callista's. I knocked once, twice. The door opened. She answered, of course. "You again?" Her voice dripped with disdain. "Here for round 2? I didn't step forward. Didn't raise my voice. "If you keep pushing," I said, "the next thing to fall won't be me. It'll be the last bit of dignity you've got left." Her smile faltered, just for a second. Then the door shut. I stood there a moment longer, the porch light flickering above me, before turning and walking back to the street. No neighbors came out. I didn't need an audience. Back at the shelter, Elior was already asleep when I returned. His arms sprawled wide, like he trusted the air around him. I sat at the small desk in the corner and began to write. Not to Trent, not to Callista, to the judge. I laid it all out. The months I'd been the only caregiver, the video from Vera, the diapers, the feedings, the emergency clinic visits when he spiked a fever, every proof of love that the court refused to call evidence. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. I stated facts. I told the truth. like a woman who'd been ignored for too long. When I folded the letter, I pressed the seal down slowly, like sealing a promise into the page. "This is the last time I'll ask to be seen," I whispered. "After this, you'll hear me." The next morning, I dressed in navy slacks and my last pressed blouse, held Elior on one hip and the envelope in my other hand. Claire offered a ride, and I took it. Inside the courthouse lobby, I stepped onto the tiled floor, the air too cold for spring. Trent stood near the elevators, talking to his attorney. He looked up, saw me. He flinched. I didn't look away. The woman behind the glass counter at the state office didn't look up right away. She typed something on her computer, expression neutral. I'd come to apply for emergency childcare support, diapers, a bit of formula, maybe even a voucher for a safer stroller. Nothing big, just enough. When she finally looked up, her tone softened, as if bracing herself. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Darlene. You don't have legal standing." It didn't matter that I'd been raising Elior since the moment Vera took her last breath. Didn't matter that I knew which side he favored when he slept, or how he liked the bottle warmed just slightly above room temp. I wasn't on paper, so I wasn't real. I nodded once, thanked her for her time, walked out without a word. Back at the shelter, the common room buzzed with noise, toddlers shrieking, mothers shouting over one another, televisions competing for attention. I sat on the edge of the faded sofa, folding a clean blanket over Elior as he slept beside me. Around me, younger women held custody documents in clear folders, made calls to CPS caseworkers on speakerphone. I opened my journal, the one I planned to hand over to the judge. "Proof of love doesn't weigh the same as proof of custody," I wrote, and beneath it, "but it should." That night, as the shelter settled into restless quiet, a knock tapped soft against my door. I opened it to see Sierra, the girl from the cot 2 doors down. Quiet, never in the mix of gossip or chaos. "I used to work for Callista," she said, eyes darting around the hallway. "At her old PR firm." I stepped back. "Come in." She handed me her phone. "I saved this before I quit. They were at some dinner party. He didn't know I was recording." I pressed play. Trent's voice came through, unmistakable. "She's like a ghost with diapers, just hovering around like she matters. I'm doing her a favor, letting her play grandma." I said nothing. I just returned the phone, hands cold. "I thought you should know," Sierra said, before slipping back out. The next day, I printed the recording at the public library. I transcribed the exact words in 3 copies. One for my lawyer, one for the court, and one for myself. That evening, as twilight dipped low over Plano, I made my way back to Trent's porch. The house looked like a magazine spread. Too perfect, too polished. I taped the envelope just beneath the porch light. No anger, just intent. In red ink, I'd written across the front, "Heard, remembered, logged." No need for names. He'd know it was from me. I walked back through the quiet streets, Elior bundled in my arms. The sky above us was cloudless, wide open. He stirred as I shifted him closer to my chest, resting his head just beneath my chin. "This is where I stop asking," I whispered. "This is where I make you listen." It started on a Thursday morning, the kind that tries to feel normal. I had Elior wrapped in his blue blanket, his eyes half-lidded with sleep, as we sat in the courtyard behind the shelter. Birds chirped. A few children chased a ball across the concrete. I was folding laundry on my lap, humming low, when 2 officers approached from the side gate. "Mrs. Darlene?" the older one asked, polite but firm. I nodded, shielding Elior's head with my hand. "We've received a report. There's been an allegation of possible child abduction." The world didn't spin. It stilled. "I'm sorry, what?" "We need to ask you to come down to the station for questioning. You're not under arrest, but we do need your cooperation." I looked around. Other women had stopped talking. One of the shelter staff was peeking through the screen door. No one moved toward me. No one offered to hold Elior. I gathered his things in silence. I didn't beg. I didn't explain. I simply stood, child in arms, and walked between two uniforms as if this were routine. The station smelled of pine disinfectant and old leather. A young officer, mid-30s, handed me a form to review. His colleague read aloud. Filed by Callista Rowe. States that you are harboring a minor without legal consent. Allegations include emotional instability, coercion, and impersonation of a legal guardian. I laid my folder on the table. Everything from the video of Vera to the transcribed recordings. I spoke calmly, explaining who I was, what I'd done, what Vera had left behind. The younger officer didn't say much, but I saw it. His eyes lingering longer on the documentation, his brow pinching slightly as he read. The other officer leaned back, arms crossed. We'll make note of your materials. You're free to go for now, but I'd suggest speaking to an attorney. Quickly. Back at the shelter, the air had changed. Not a word had been spoken, but it didn't need to be. Whispers floated like steam. A woman I'd helped last week avoided eye contact. Another pulled her daughter closer when we passed in the hallway. Elior cooed in my arms, unaware of the shadow cast around us. I placed him on my cot and sat beside him. Truth takes longer to echo than a lie, I whispered. That night, I stayed up writing. 2 statements, one to the court, requesting an independent investigation. The other, a letter addressed to Callista. Not out of rage, out of certainty. You weaponized your voice, Callista, so I'll wield mine now. The day you raised your voice in lies, you taught me to raise mine in truth. I folded it carefully. Didn't mail it. Not yet. The next evening, I received a text from the younger officer. Just one sentence. There's something you need to see. Check your email. I opened the file, and there it was. A photo, a screenshot, a thread of messages. Enough to gut any hope of this being an isolated smear. My hand tightened around the phone. So this is how low you'll go. The morning of the hearing arrived with an odd stillness, the kind that settles in just before a storm. Elior was still asleep, curled in a borrowed bassinet. I'd laid out his clothes the night before, double-checked the bottle bag, and printed every piece of evidence I had. Vera's video, Trent's recorded insults, the letter from the shelter counselor who had seen me raise that child with more care than most see in a lifetime. I didn't rehearse my speech again. Not out loud. I whispered it in my mind as I folded Elior's blanket, as I buttoned my blouse, as I tied my shoes. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just has to show up. The courthouse was already humming when I arrived. People in suits, whispering, darting glances. I walked in with the file under one arm and Elior's diaper bag slung across the other. I'd left him with Claire for the day. He didn't belong in that room, not yet. Trent sat on the other side of the courtroom, beside his attorney, jaw tight. Callista sat a row behind, her lipstick perfect, her phone just barely hidden in her purse. The judge entered. The gavel struck. My name was called. I stood, steady, quiet. I handed over the flash drive first. Vera's voice filled the room, shaky but strong. You made me feel like a mother. You saw me when I couldn't see myself. Please, let my son grow up loved. The room was silent, not even the scribble of a pen. Then I passed forward the transcript of Trent's recording. His voice, sharp, sneering. She's just dead weight with diapers. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply said, I was invisible, until now. Outside, the air was too bright. I barely made it down the steps before Callista's voice rang out behind me, phone in hand, camera on. She's framing us, she wailed, tears welling. I'm the victim here. She's trying to steal our family. The video went up instantly. Within minutes, people were sharing it, commenting, liking, attacking. But they weren't attacking me. Because another video had surfaced, a neighbor's security footage, Callista laughing on her phone the same night she filed that bogus police report. Let the old lady trip over her pride, she said on the recording, waving her wine glass. She's nothing. It spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up. Online forums dissected it. The tide turned. "She's a saint," someone wrote. "Where's the apology?" Vera would be ashamed of them. By sunset, Trent's firm had released a statement. Mr. Elroy is on indefinite leave. Callista's PR contracts were terminated within the hour. Sponsors didn't need public liability. I walked back to the shelter with the weight of 100 days lifted off my spine. For once, it wasn't shame that followed me. It was peace. One of the counselors, a woman named Sandra, met me in the hallway and embraced me tightly. "You didn't just protect a child," she said. "You protected dignity." That night, I sat with Elior in my lap. The lights were dim, the air warm. He looked up at me, his little fingers curling around my thumb. "We don't need to scream to be heard," I whispered. "We just had to speak when it counted." It was one of those warm mornings that makes you pause before stepping into it. The park near the shelter was quiet. Just a few older couples walking in sync, the occasional jogger, and the breeze playing gently with the leaves. I pushed Elior's stroller along the winding path, his little hands fisted near his cheeks, sound asleep. For the first time in months, no one whispered when I passed. No curious glances. Just polite nods, kind smiles. I wasn't the woman with scandal hanging off her like a bad coat anymore. I was just a grandmother walking her grandson. Still, I couldn't forget. That kind of cold settles in your marrow. Even sunshine doesn't reach it. But today, it warmed the edges. Back at the shelter, a letter waited for me. Official-looking, stiff paper in a manila envelope. I sat on the bench outside and opened it slowly, afraid to hope, but too tired to brace for anything else. It was from Family Services. The decision was final. Full legal guardianship of Elior granted to me. No conditions, no limitations. Just one simple line. In the best interest of the child. I pressed the papers against my chest and closed my eyes. The tears didn't come from joy. They came from relief, from being seen at last, not as a liability, but as the anchor I had always been. That night, I placed the papers in Vera's old Bible. She would have wanted it there, next to her wedding photo and the dried rose she'd kept from Elior's baby shower. The memory came back uninvited. The night we arrived at the shelter, when I had nothing but a baby in one arm and a plastic bag of diapers in the other. The storage room they gave us barely held the two of us, and a fold-out cot. Elior cried until he couldn't anymore. I sat on the cold floor and sang to him, my voice barely holding itself up. I remembered thinking I was just an extra in a life I'd poured myself into, a footnote in a family I once centered. But that night, holding him, humming lullabies into his hair, I realized something I hadn't let myself believe until now. Extras become authors when no one else picks up the pen. 3 days after the custody ruling, my phone rang just as I was boiling water for tea. It was Trent. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was dry. "I don't know what I became, Mom." I stood still, the kettle hissing faintly in the background. "We all become something," I said. "The question is what we do once we know." There was no apology. I didn't expect one. We said little else. Just silence. But not the kind that hurts anymore. This silence was clarity. Later that night, I rocked Elior in my arms. He stirred, his lips forming shapes that hadn't yet turned to words. Then I heard it. Soft, sleepy, mumbled. "Mom." It hit me not as a wound, but a gift. I placed my hand gently over his chest. "She'd be proud of you, little one," I whispered. "And I think, maybe, she'd be proud of me too. Life doesn't always unfold in fair chapters. Sometimes you give your best, love without pause, and still end up standing alone on someone else's porch. But if this journey has taught me anything, it's this. Silence can be strength, and dignity doesn't require permission. You can lose your home, your title, even your name in someone else's paperwork, but you don't lose your worth unless you stop standing for it. Maybe you've been there too, pushed aside, Told you no longer matter, so I ask you, what's the line you'll draw? And when the time comes, will you choose to speak? If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't, I'd love to hear why. Let's keep these conversations real. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. We're just getting started.